Wesleyan Methodist Church. And I want to invite you to listen to our church-sponsored program, The Voice of Victory, every Sunday morning at 7:30 a.m. on this station, AM 1160 WCCS and 101.1 FM. Tune in and find biblical help, guidance, and inspiration for answering.
Well, how's it going this week?
Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank on WCCS, and it is time now for our interview segment presented by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. It's Friday at 7:47. That means we have Bob Pollock from the Cooperative Extension Office joining us today. And if you have a question for Mr. Pollock, you can certainly call in 724-479-1160. 724-349-WCCS. Those are the numbers to call if you want to ask him any questions. So, Bob, first, my first concern, obviously, is water levels. We're now at a drought watch for all of Pennsylvania, going into the second week of this now. So, how is that affecting? I mean, obviously, this is going to have a negative impact on agriculture, the plants, and everything else. So, have you been seeing a lot of impact on this? Have people been talking about this around the offices?
Sure, it's been dry.
Yeah, of course.
And even the rain we had, we had some significant rainfall a week ago, and the ground just absorbed that.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing, and then a few days later, the ground was dry enough on top that you could work it. It wasn't muddy or wet in most places, so that the ground, was so dry. So that it's a good thing that that it was absorbed. That way it gets it into where the plants can reach it. So that was very helpful. We couldn't have gone on very much longer, especially with a lot of the younger plants that are in the ground that don't have an extensive root system yet and an ability to absorb that. So we really needed that. And now when you look at the forecast, we're almost every day they're calling for something, but
yeah.
Look, it's just still been so dry. It's hard for that moisture to just
get down to where it needs to go because the topsoil is absorbing it.
Yeah. Well, and even it just doesn't seem like it wants to rain very much.
Right. Yeah.
It's trying.
It's trying. Yeah. It's very trying.
We're not getting a lot. So
yeah.
That leads us to we need to be checking plants regularly, especially if you planted trees and shrubs and things this spring. Stick your fingers down in the ground.
Best way to do it, huh?
Look. Even if you have a mulch, pull that mulch back a little bit and check those root balls. Because of as dry as it's been, we had a little bit of warmer weather there, but it's cooled off. The cooling off benefits us in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not going to evaporate as quick.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't help plants grow as much, but on the flip side of that, it doesn't stress them as much either. So just really checking those plants because they haven't had the ability to grow those roots out into the soil and be able to absorb more moisture. So the soil can look wet, but those root balls might be dry.
So the best thing to do is just actually get your hands dirty in that case.
And really check them.
And really do a thorough check. Obviously, this is going to impact watering times, I think, for the average, for the backyard gardener, if you will pardon my expression, because that's my frame of reference. So my advice, the advice I've learned over the years anyway, has been to water the plants kind of as needed, but maybe do it in the evening hours or the morning hours. That way the major heat of the day doesn't impact them as hard.
Right. During the hottest part of the day, and especially if it's sunny, that can evaporate quicker. So watering, either in the evening, and then you have the benefit of the night to not lose that as much. Now, what we try to do there is let's not water the whole plant. Let's not do overhead irrigation at night.
Yeah.
Because then the plants or the crop that we're trying to grow on those plants remains damp or moist all night. That will then promote the opportunity for disease issues.
Mold and disease and things like that. Okay.
So if we can water the roots, that's what absorbs the water in the evening, and then or do it early in the morning Then it's a little easier to do overhead because we know sun's gonna come up.
Right.
We're gonna dry things off quicker, and so there's less chance of running into or promoting disease problems.
Yeah.
If we do that in the morning.
So that's why Dad had me water close to the ground in the evenings.
Yeah.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
Dad. Thanks very much. Now I understand why. Okay, but I again, the frame of mind of the backyard gardener. I've had some people tell me that they've had some pretty good vegetable crops so far this year with lettuces and peppers and things like that. It's been pretty good so far for them.
So amazingly, things seem to do better on a drier year, and a lot of that is because the ground's not saturated with water. There are root diseases that we can run into when there's too much moisture in the soil, and then also just the plants staying damp and moist all the time in cloudier weather. That's not as good for plant growth, and also disease issues. So we can have. It's usually better to be drier and be able to water than the other way.
It's just finding that delicate balance is the tough part.
It sure is. Yeah.
Yeah. If you go ahead.
So there, advantages and disadvantages both ways, but sunnier conditions usually promotes better growth, and as long as there's moisture there and ample nutrients, those plants are going to perform pretty well. And on drier years, a lot of times things might taste better. The sugars that are in there are more concentrated because there may be a little bit less moisture in there. On wet years, the plants will absorb that moisture.
And the flavor
vegetable
might be diluted in flavor.
Right, diluted flavor. So sunnier conditions, drier conditions can help concentrate those sugars and maybe make things more sweet.
What should people be keeping in mind right now as we're now in the summer months?
But just continue to, a lot of crops are shorter days. Especially you mentioned lettuces, and some of the cole crops are shorter days so that you can have multiple crops of those.
Okay.
So if you've been able to keep planting seeds, and then you can get multiple.
Okay, multiple runs.
Harvest from those, and then there's other crops. Usually the tomatoes are a crop that we're going to plant.
Yeah.
And then we've got to grow those all season in order to get the fruit off of those. So you got to maintain those. And so just continuing to plant. Even with beans, cole crops we tend to do a spring crop.
Yeah.
And a lot of those are looking pretty good. And again, that has to do with
the drier
weather
conditions
and sunnier conditions. They've done pretty well. And we haven't had overly hot conditions either. That's the other thing that'll trigger some of those cool season crops to bolt, meaning they will send up a flower stalk and then try to produce seed.
Yeah.
Versus
producing
cabbage.
versus
producing cabbage or
yeah.
broccoli or cauliflower. Other examples of that. They will bolt, and then that's the end of that. So sometimes those crops do better as fall planted crops because we're starting to get shorter days, cooler temperatures in the fall, and they tend to do better then. But this spring is an exemption to that, actually.
Yeah. So let's talk about some invasive species right now, because I actually just had an experience with some unwanted ivy growing up the side of the house. Thankfully, our landlord and the two of us, we were able to take care of things, and now it's off, thankfully. But it just seemed to come out of nowhere this year. Again, probably because of the hotter, drier conditions. You mentioned that it had a spring up effect, essentially.
So depending on what that plant was, and of course, anything that you don't want can be invasive or can be considered a weed. So it might have been an ornamental vine, but if it was English ivy that attaches to the structure and
it was
up,
attached. Yes.
That's an ornamental vine, and in the right place and everything that it can do well as a ground cover, but it has the ability to attach and grow up things and take over things. So it can, in that case, can become invasive, or even down the road potentially an issue with structure or conditions on the house,
Which,
you know, might
which was what I was
dampness
concerned about. Yeah, or the or the foundation even.
Yeah.
Getting into that. And of course, everybody's still keeping an eye out for spotted lanternflies, I would assume, just kind of crushing them whenever they see them.
Of course, you're on the lookout for any insects and diseases that, depending on what it is you're growing,
Yeah.
may become an issue. So scouting, that's,
Mhm.
we talk about integrated pest management or IPM practices. Scouting is just really important for anything you're growing, because everything has something that it's susceptible to, right? There's strengths and weaknesses of every plant. Some things are more resistant to both diseases and insects, and other plants are not resistant at all. So just kind of learning more about the plants you're growing, and taking time to observe what is normal on that plant. Even tomatoes, for example, can get, just learning about what color should it look like.
Yeah.
And then different varieties will grow differently. Some might the leaves might start to curl in.
Yeah.
But that can be normal on certain varieties of tomatoes.
Right.
But it could also mean that there are leafhoppers or aphids or even mites that are attacking that plant and causing that leaf to curl in. The other thing that will cause leaf curl is moisture stress.
Right.
So if it's too dry, then plants with larger leaves can start to roll those leaves or curl them in, just as a way to try to protect against moisture loss.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, I'm getting a master class every time I get the chance to interview you, Bob. Thanks very much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hopefully those with the backyard gardens were able to glean a couple tips there. Thanks again for joining us on Indiana in the Morning. Can't wait to hear from you next week.
Thank you.
Bob Pollock from the Cooperative Extension joining us on Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank. Our interviews presented by Marcus & Mack, voted Best Personal Injury Law Firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. News coming up at the top of the hour.
Hi, this is Chad Martin from First Commonwealth Bank. Through the years,